Welcome to the Interaction 2.1 Forum. This session is Leaders of Today and Tomorrow. My name is Maureen Greenwood Baskin. I'm the Program Director of the Global Children's Rights Program at Wellspring Philanthropic Fund, and it's my great honor to be a moderator today. Children and youth represent the possibility of the future and also the present of today. We also see tremendous opportunity in children and youth to collaborate, learn from them, and as builders of more fair and just societies. From climate change to COVID-19, young people today are at the forefront of all the major social movements, whether it's on democracy, economics, gender equality, gender justice, or advocacy to provide critical services. Today, we're going to hear from three changemaker panelists around the world who are at the forefront of leading social change in their countries and have important messages to share for collaboration and partnership with the U.S. community. First, we're going to hear from Alwell Aigbe, who is a local peace builder at the Building Blocks for Peace Foundation, a youth-led organization working around issues of conflict prevention, peace building, and countering violent extremism in Nigeria. As a research director, he manages the production of research outputs on youth peace building, and he's also active in the African Youth Advocacy Team, the Global Coalition on Youth Peace and Security, and UNESCO's youth-led research. We will also hear from Melina Cynthia Rasu, an attorney with 12 years of experience in the legal, governmental, and non-governmental sectors. She is the founder of Women Lead Movement, an organization that promotes social empowerment initiatives in local communities. She also is an inaugural fellow at the Obama Foundation Leader in Africa, a Future Africa Forum, and currently in the Mandela Washington Fellowship. Our third panelist is Nafula Wafula, a fierce advocate for gender equality and human rights who's passionate about Pan-Africanism, youth empowerment, and social justice. She's currently the vice chairperson at the Commonwealth Youth Council. She's also the programs director at the Bridges Center, an organization that provides child rescue and protection services, education, and economic empowerment to at-risk youth and out-of-school girls. She's also involved in the Commonwealth Business Women Network and the Global Network of Women's Shelters. So now we will turn to the questions. What are the biggest overarching challenges facing children and youth right now? How are you and your organization addressing these challenges? How have the challenges been affected by COVID-19? How can we look to youth leaders on solutions? So with that, I will turn first to Nafula.
Yes, thank you so much for the question. And I am really excited to be on this panel and on this forum. So I will speak on the basis of two hats that I wear. One is from my organization here in Kenya, a community-based organization, and the work that we do with children and youth, particularly at-risk girls. And secondly, as a young board member on the International Youth Foundation. So of course, COVID-19 has brought a lot of challenges. And I think the ones that I've seen manifest here in Kenya the most are, as it pertains to children and young people, is one, lack of opportunities, lack of employment opportunities, and self-sustenance as it pertains to young people. Our unemployment rates in Kenya, as I'm sure is the case in Africa and beyond, have skyrocketed. And many young people have been left out without access to opportunities and without income to sustain basic survival, even just access to food. So that has been a big challenge for young people. And for children, the interruption when it came to access to education, the year-long interruption brought with it a lot of challenges, specifically when it comes to girls. The rates of teenage pregnancy in Kenya have also skyrocketed. We have so many girls that have dropped out of school because they got pregnant or because they couldn't go back to school because of the interruption in the economic situation within their families, and also just a high rates of suicide and depression because of the mental health situation that young people are facing because of COVID-19. So within my organization, which is Bridges Center, where I'm the programs director, we do child rescue and child protection. And we've noticed that during the COVID period, up until this point, we had a higher number of children that had been neglected. We had a higher number of young girls that had dropped out of school that we needed to work with and offer a safe space to. And also we had to change a lot and scale up a lot of our economic empowerment programs that target out of school girls, because a lot of them lost a lot of opportunities during this period. There has been a crisis, of course, with regard to access to resources, just to be able to support these programs. So what we did in response to this was, of course, a lot of things had to change just to make sure that we are aligning ourselves to COVID-19 protocols within the country and to ensure the protection and the safety of all the children and young people we work with. So we took in smaller numbers of students and broke down the number of classes. This was, of course, difficult, but we were able to do it as well because luckily we are one of few organizations that were also able to complement a lot of our programs with a sort of tech element. So bringing on board some e-learning components to what we were doing in terms of training the young people that we train. This past year has forced us to really think outside the box in terms of how do we continue to empower and work with vulnerable children and young people in our communities with diminished resources. But thinking outside the box, thinking creatively and innovatively allowed us to work even in the most difficult circumstances and even with the ongoing challenges that we continue to see.
Nafula, thank you for sharing what you see as the ongoing challenges and increased challenges in your community, and also the creative ways that you're responding to meet the needs and the increased challenges in your community. All well, how are you seeing the situation in Nigeria?
Thank you so much, Maureen. It's a big pleasure to be here today to discuss with Nafula and Marilyn on these issues that are affecting youth and children around the world. Now, a very fascinating conversation that has been started by Nafula, and I really relate to that in terms of my own context here in Nigeria. I'm working in local communities in Nigeria to counter violent extremism, and I lead the research and documentation efforts of my organization, Building Blocks for Peace Foundation here. Now, just like I said, very similar context here. Diminishing livelihood opportunities here in Nigeria. 60% of the population of over 200 million people is less than 25. And our unemployment rate keeps rising. It's projected to go over 30% this year. So there's like a whole lot of educated people coming out of the schools, both private and public schools in Nigeria, and very, very limited job opportunities for them. Now, for such a population, there's a large number of young people that supposedly could be a source of violence rather than of peace. So I see this lack of diminishing opportunities here as really as a major constraint for young people. But then again, beyond just the lack of opportunities, there's also increasing insecurity in the country caused by emergent conflicts that are emerging, such as farmer-herder clashes, and then now a new wave of insecurity in terms of militancy and kidnapping across the country. So insecurity, lack of or inadequate livelihood opportunities are major issues. Now, to tackle these issues, what my organization really does is builds the capacity of young people to actually participate and contribute their abilities to peace building in these local communities. So we understand that for people that are not productively engaged in terms of livelihood opportunities, they could become disillusioned and then choose violent extremism as a way out. So what we do is invest in their capacity first for livelihood opportunities. So we give them income generating activities from time to time, just really working with this core group of vulnerable youth that could be predisposed towards violence, and then making sure that they have this option. They understand that they have these options that they can take advantage of in terms of self-empowerment and business opportunities that they can take to be able to make a living. But most importantly, we also emphasize on capacity building on for young people to be involved in peace building. So on conflict sensitivity, on conflict prevention, conflict analysis, ways in which to respond to conflict that may be provoked, the context where we are based, or by other external factors. My organization does a whole lot of capacity building, and this is inspired by the Youth Peace and Security Agenda, which we are part and parcel of in terms of the resolutions by the United Nations and also the African Union Continental Framework on Youth Peace and Security. So we step this down to local communities. We provide also evidence-based research that shows the impact that young people are making in these communities. And we also strike like important partnerships with local and international peace building organizations, but most importantly also with community stakeholders as well as local government officials, because these are people that are active in these local communities where young people are and where young people are facing these deprivations in terms of employment and also in terms of educational opportunities too. So of course the issues have worsened thanks to COVID. Nigeria is a country where there's significant ethnic and religious fault lines that contribute to the political tensions that you hear about on the news. So what COVID has done now is simply worsened these current realities and then made it a lot, exposed most of the practices of local authorities that are not that do not adhere to best practices. So for instance, during the COVID pandemic, there were palliative measures that were supposed to be put in place, and then a lot of private citizens contributed significant resources just for these palliatives to take care of the most vulnerable people in our populations. But unfortunately, the policymakers did not distribute these palliatives up until a particular crisis occurred at the end of last year. So this has also shown that serious fault lines in terms of corruption and then in terms of mismanagement of public resources are also evident in our context. Now, what we have been doing to counter these challenges for young people during COVID is really to take advantage of digital peace building or digital technologies to ensure that young people are still connected to livelihood opportunities, to ensure that young people are still able to take advantage of educational opportunities and opportunities for them to learn. So in terms of in response to conflicts, we're having a lot of multi-stakeholder dialogues that are going virtually in terms of webinars and conferences, and we're really engaging relevant stakeholders in our communities to ensure that we talk about these issues that are causing conflicts in our local communities, and then we come together to find a common resolution for them. In terms of job opportunities, we are carrying out massive sensitization and training on using technologies so that young people can take advantage of technologies to create opportunities for themselves. So a whole lot of capacity building trainings on massive open online courses, websites, and also teaching them new skills such as graphic design, such as web development, online dialogue facilitation, opportunities that young people can take advantage of during this time.
Thanks, Alwell. So we'll turn now to Melina. Can you tell us about the situation in South Africa?
Thank you very much, Maureen, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to be on a panel with these two distinguished activists on the continent. I'm also very glad to hear that South Africa is not living on an island, because we are dealing with exactly the same issues as my colleagues from Kenya and Nigeria, obviously to a lesser extent than others. So I will be discussing 4 broad challenges that the children and youth in South Africa in particular is facing. But as we know, with socioeconomic challenges, they are all interconnected. If you don't have a job, you will have poverty and you'll have hunger. So, so all of them basically are clustered together. The first big issue, and especially it came through with the COVID-19, was poverty and hunger. I have never seen poverty and hunger at the levels that I've seen them in 2020. I mean, currently we have 2/3 of all South African children that lives in poverty. We have 6.5 million people, especially children and young people, that suffer from hunger. And that was in 2019. That was before the COVID pandemic. And obviously that escalated immensely. And some of the root causes of this was unemployment. It was lack of skills development opportunities and lack of skills development, inequality in our education system, because as you know, South Africa went in as the most unequal society in the world. Now you can imagine if you go in as the most unequal society in the world, what a pandemic would do to a situation like that, where 78% of the population lives in absolute abject poverty. So it was absolutely very, very disturbing. We also have a very weak social relief system. Currently, 18 million people in South Africa are dependent on social grants, which is obviously not sustainable because there's no jobs. And only 8 million people contribute towards the taxes that goes towards paying these social grants. So we are really facing, very difficult challenges when it comes to that, in terms of balancing the need for social grants in order to at least give people the basic necessities to survive, and then also creating job opportunities, in order to restore dignity within our society. We have increase in crime and violence. South Africa is an extremely violent society. And what we've been seeing is the violence that have been perpetrated towards children and young people, but more disturbing, violence perpetrated by young people. Young people driven to gangsterism and gangster activity. The increase in substance abuses amongst young people in South Africa has increased due to the socioeconomic devastation and the conditions that they are living in. Once again, one issue affecting the other. Gender-based violence has also reached crisis proportions. And when we talk about gender-based violence, it is not always about women being affected, older women being affected by gender-based violence. Gender-based violence also affects children and young people as well. So that has also seen an increase over the last few years. A big issue, we are seeing HIV increasing between the ages of young people between the ages of 15 and 24 years old. So HIV is a major challenge amongst young people in South Africa. And of course, it has devastating impacts on their future prospects. Mental health is a serious problem amongst children and young people. It's driven by a sense of hopelessness. It's driven by the sense of lack of opportunities. And that is currently the context in which children and young people find themselves in South Africa. So what I'm trying to do under my organization, the Women Lead Movement, we have two objectives. The one is promoting a gender equal society. And the second objective is promoting an active and participatory citizenry. We have three pillars on which we operate. Number one is education, empowerment, and then advocacy and campaigning. Now, it might sound straightforward when we talk about gender equality and promoting gender equality, but these issues and the programs that we address under each objective are substantial issues. For example, we have gender-based violence, education around gender-based violence and gender inequality, and prevention strategies, for example. We have personal development skills. We have leadership development skills. We have conflict management. We educate on reproductive health, sexual rights, HIV, teenage pregnancies. We have economic empowerment and entrepreneurship. And of course, Women Lead Movement, we don't always have all the expertise. We partner with organizations that have the capacity and that has the expertise to deal. So with economic empowerment, we are partnering with an organization, a private company that is now, empowering our young people in entrepreneurship. And we are scaling informal businesses, for example, in our local community. With regard to substance abuse, we're partnering with one of the biggest, substance abuse organizations in the Western Cape, for example, because they have the expertise. We're also doing mentoring for high school learners. We're doing trauma counseling. Of course, I'm not a psychologist. I would love to be, but we get the experts in to assist these young people in dealing with their traumatic situations. Because you see, our youngsters are a reflection of our broader society. What society is basically a glimpse into what is happening in the individual, what is happening within the family, what is happening within the community. And it is sort of, projected outwards. The second pillar is promoting an active and participatory citizenry. They don't care about democracy. They don't care about peace building. They don't care about the future. And so it's really instilling that sense of responsibility in our youth to want to become part of creating a better South Africa, creating a better community for themselves. And it's encouraging around that. So I educate them about democracy, believe it or not. People talk about democracy, but they don't understand what democracy actually means. I educate them as a public and constitutional lawyer. I educate them about human rights and the Constitution. And so all these, educational components capacitates them to understand the system better and how to engage with the government better. One thing that I have to mention, Women Lead Movement had to step out of our comfort zones also, because we also had to do food relief during the COVID pandemic. We were forced to. I mean, the need was so grave. And so what we decided was that we would also play our part and ensuring that there's food relief efforts from Women Lead Movement side into various communities. And so we probably reached more than 1,000, 2,000 people through our programs during the COVID period alone. And then lastly, we got funding from an organization to provide financial assistance to young girls to keep them in school. Sometimes they just need financial resources, paying off their school fees, buying off their school clothes, paying their school books, their stationery. So that is also a part where Women Lead Movement sort of stepped in and said, this is how we would like to also assist during this COVID pandemic.
Thank you so much for those insightful assessments, both of the challenges, and the solutions. We clearly heard in all three situations about an ongoing economic crisis, about the new pandemic health crisis, about social and security challenges as well. And at the same time, it's very encouraging to hear about some of the creative solutions that you're finding in terms of trainings on vocational skills and life skills, your use of technology, especially while people are home, where that's applicable to try and reach people, and also on youth leadership and participation. For this next round, we'll do one question to each of you. Nafula, you talked about the vocational skills that you've been training. Will the COVID-19 pandemic change the mix of vocational skills that you teach in your programs? Has the pandemic exposed new skill gaps?
The situation within the vocational skills sector in Kenya prior to the pandemic, and as is the case now, although it is slowly changing, was such that the vocational skills that were being offered to young people were not responsive to the current needs of the society. One, they're very gendered. So you'd find that girls or young women will do courses on hairdressing and catering, and then boys would be taken to mechanical school or carpentry. And so they are very determined by gender roles and gender perceptions. Secondly, they were not evolving to respond to the current needs of our society. And then thirdly, vocational skills are not very popular at the moment because there's a very heavy focus on white collar jobs. And what's happening is because the employment situation, there's such a crisis in that space, is that more and more people are having to think outside the box in terms of empowering as many young people as we can. So at Bridges Center, at our Skills Development Center, we work with out-of-school girls, at-risk girls, young women, also survivors of gender-based violence, between the ages of 16 and 24. And we train them on vocational skills. But what has happened in terms of our approach, and I think what should happen in terms of the collective approach, is a shift towards thinking about vocational skills in a way that teaches young people, A, to be more creative, and B, focuses on innovation, and C, is responsive to the evolving needs of our societies and our communities. So what we have done, for example, is our training programs focus on training girls and young women on how to repair cell phones. And what we are trying to do is build up on that. So how do they repair cell phones? And then how do we scale that up into them learning how to code? Or how can they use cell phone technology or cell phones to create other things? So one of the things that I've seen the girls starting to learn is, for example, how to change cell phones into DIY CCTV cameras in order to assist the small sort of like shops or enterprises that wouldn't be able to afford those. So we try and teach young girls and young people how to think innovatively. And that is what I feel like the COVID pandemic is pushing us towards, or is forcing us to do. is focus on innovation, think about the future of work, and think about the challenges that are now beginning to face our communities. I was able to see a lot of innovation coming out of Africa and coming out of the continent, coming out of the world. We had a young person in Nigeria who was coming up with something around, it was a mobile clinic to be able to reach patients in rural areas in Nigeria. And so a lot of young people are beginning to innovate within that space of health and also to respond to the current needs we are facing. But I think what we need to do is ensure that now vocational skills training is centered around innovation that responds to the needs of their immediate communities, whether that is in rural spaces, in formal urban settlements, or wherever that is. And I think second to that is the education needs to back that up. So the education systems that we have need to be created in a way or reinvented requires a reimagination that allows young people, allows children to begin to think in a way that that will help them to know, help them to envision themselves as the creators of the solutions of these massive challenges that we are facing in the world today. So for me, I think most importantly is that the education system, the formal education system, goes hand in hand with what we are seeing in terms of the training and empowerment space, and that this alignment is there at primary, secondary, and tertiary level, and that we shift into this space where innovation is actually allowed, so that we allow young people to be able to be sufficiently empowered.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And it feels like what you were saying would absolutely apply domestically in the United States right now, too, that the change in the economy and technology requires ongoing creative thinking and innovation, and then also appreciate your sense of tying that to the education system, so that the formal education system also supports that creativity and innovation. And I think those are well articulated, clear recommendations that I think have resonance. Let's turn now to Allwell. Appreciated your comments on peace building efforts. How can we better support youth efforts to build peace in their communities? Can you share more about police brutality and the End SARS movement?
So yeah, very great points so far that every participant has shared. I like, thanks Nafula for referencing the Nigerian youth who has brought a lot of innovation with his mobile clinic. That was just really fascinating, and it made me very proud as a Nigerian to see that. Now, thank you, Maureen, for the question again. And I think the End SARS movement just really shows how young people are refusing to accept the status quo, and how they have decided to be agents of change rather than to just be a silent, and pacifist, if I could use that word, generation that doesn't stand up to demand change. So basically, SARS stands for Special Anti-Robbery Squad. So this was like a specialized elite unit of the Nigerian police created in 1992 to combat kidnappers and armed robbery and all of those things. But in the last, at least in the last decade, it has really turned out to be something else in terms of a lot of its officers going rogue and then stereotyping young people, especially young male people, and then these young people being subject, including young women, also being subject to gender-based violence, torture, and a whole lot of extrajudicial killings too. So in October, this all came to a head when young Nigerians decided that enough was enough, and then they trooped out to the streets to peacefully protest over the course of about 14 days against this kind of action, and really calling for true reforms in the Nigerian police. But unfortunately, despite the gains that were made, and despite the fact that young people really came out peacefully, unfortunately, the authorities responded brashly, and then which led to the Lekki massacre of October 2020, where defenseless young people were gunned down by our security forces, which was a really, really sad day for myself and my colleagues, the youth peace builders, really. Well, subsequently, since then, the government has made some attempts to actually address some of the demands. The demands were that the unit should be scrapped, police brutality should end, victims of police brutality should be compensated, and then there should be investigations to ensure that justice is served to erring members of the police force. So a number of panels of inquiry were created in all of the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, and then people that have experienced brutality are coming forward to actually testify and seek redress. Well, unfortunately, not so much has happened in terms of the changes that we are seeking. We haven't seen so much change in the structure or reform of the police just yet. And since then, a number of myself and my colleagues, we have been trying to deepen the conversation and also make sure that we have like a multi-stakeholder dialogues, which we have had virtually and also physically in different parts of the country, to engage security forces and other partners to ensure that they are able to create the necessary change that is needed in our security agencies, which is still ongoing. And so far, we're making a bit of headway, but I think we need more support. First, from the U.S. From the U.S. Embassy and also the new Biden administration. We are really grateful for the support that President Biden, then he was Democratic candidate Biden at that time, gave to Nigerian youth who were protesting under the End SARS hashtag. So on the day of the Lekki massacre on October 20th, then candidate Biden spoke out against it and then pledged his support of the U.S. government to stand with Nigerian youth against any form of brutality. So we are really hoping that going forward now in terms of relations between Nigeria and the Biden administration, we hope that he would engage sufficiently with our stakeholders, especially our leadership of the security forces, and also bilaterally to ensure that sufficient gains are made in terms of progress, in terms of reforms in our security sector. Then we also hope that we can see a lot of emphasis on protection of young peace builders in the country. So unfortunately, because of increased insecurity in the country, young peace builders are subject to kidnappings, and we've had to pay a number of ransoms for some of my colleagues. And then they have really, because we are working in these local communities where conflict is actually occurring, they are subject to physical harm. So I would like the emphasis to be placed by the Biden administration and also U.S. stakeholders on protecting young people, which is actually the current discourse in youth, peace, and security in terms of the Security Council Resolution 2535 that was adopted in 2020 that emphasizes youth protection. I think that is needed much more than ever before in Nigeria. Then also we need sustainable partnerships between youth organizations and U.S. embassies, as well as US-based international peace-building organizations. So in December 2020, my organization led a documentary process to just really document the impact of 17 youth peace-building organizations across Nigeria. So those working around climate change, sustainable livelihoods, gender empowerment, conflict prevention, and peace building. We were able to document the impact that they make. And strangely, they are able to make this amazing impact in these local communities on budgets of less than $3,000 annually, which is unbelievable for the level of impact that they are making in the lives of people in the local communities. I was privileged to be in a conversation in December with U.S. Congresswomen Susan Brooks and Grace Meng on the Youth Peace and Security Act and how that Youth Peace and Security Act would empower young peace builders in Africa, parts of the world. So I want to emphasize that that act would create youth focal points in U.S. donor agencies such as USAID and then other U.S. State departments, delegations in different parts of Africa. Now, these focal points would be able to emphasize the inclusion of youth peace builders within implementation of peace building programs in the country, which is what is needed. Then it would also allocate specific funding to youth organizations. So I do hope that the U.S. Congress is able to push through with this YPS Act so that it can be passed into law and then really scale up the impact that we need to make here in Africa.
Thank you, Awel, for that intense description of what's happening. I appreciate the leadership for the structural reform of the police. Also, the youth leadership is a part of that social movement. We heard you on the need of really protecting young people and also on the need of resources reaching local communities and, bottom-up solutions with local leadership for social change. Interesting to hear about your interactions with our own policy process here and your awareness of the Youth, Peace, and Security Act. So we'll turn now to Melina. What do you consider to be the biggest challenges facing girls? What are the opportunities to better include girls in the implementation programs? And how has the pandemic affected girls?
I think briefly, the biggest umbrella issue that all girls are facing globally is the issue of gender inequality, okay? Because gender inequality affects education, it affects reproductive health rights, it affects child marriages, the issues of child marriages, female genital mutilation, access to economic opportunities, it impacts poverty, etc. So that is sort of the big challenge that we are facing. But gender-based violence is something that is destroying the fabric of society. It's destroying women. There's various forms of GBV, sexual, mental, physical, emotional, verbal. It affects your personal development. It affects your mental health. It affects your prospects of furthering education, and even your economic opportunities in the future. So if ever there is something to focus on, advocacy in terms of changing gender inequality to gender equality and holding governments across the world accountable, having that political will to not only draft policy and law, but to also implement policy and law and bringing the financial contribution in order to change the situation of women and girls on the ground. That is going to be critical. And then also investing in programs of gender-based violence, not the reactive programs, because I seriously have a problem with that, but the proactive ones where we prevent gender-based violence from happening. How do we change the attitudes, the mindsets, and the behaviors that lead toward gender-based violence? Those are the kind of programs that we need to invest in. And also the self-confidence of girls, of young girls, assisting them with life skills, leadership skills, entrepreneurial skills, helping them set goals and establish values within their own lives, because that is also a contributing factor towards the perpetuation of gender inequality as well as gender-based violence.
Thanks for sharing that gender inequality assessment, which it's important to understand the mindsets and the social norms if we're really going to build that transformational change for this just world. So stepping back to all of the panelists, in the US, this is a moment to rethink the US government structures and priorities to better address the needs of children and young people. With the new US administration, are there new opportunities for the administration, Congress, or the advocacy community? How can the US government, donors, and civil society better consult and partner with young leaders from affected communities? What are best practices in supporting your work and elevating youth voices? Do you have advice to the US audience of governments, donors, and civil society? So we'll do a closing round here, and we will go to you, Nafila. Thanks.
I think, first of all, I will mention the policy component. I am so happy that the global gag rule was reversed, particularly because we work with young girls. That is the issue right there, is the fact that policies in the US will determine the direction and the access to resources by organizations here in sub-Saharan Africa. And that makes it a bit challenging because at the end of the day, our needs don't change. The needs of the communities here don't change, the issues don't change, but the shifts in policy directions in countries that hold the resources, once those change, it ends up affecting the lives of millions of people here. Donor agencies need to really question the situation around funding and access to resources by these organizations that do so much good work, but who end up hanging on a string depending on which policies have now come into place. So I think that is one major challenge, but I'm grateful that there is a little bit of hope right now, especially within organizations that work in sexual reproductive health with girls, and I'm hopeful that this will continue. Again, the policies, everything is intertwined. Yeah. So the different issues that we talk about are all rooted in poverty. They're all rooted in inequality, and therefore every single issue that we're speaking about on this panel today ends up touching on each other. A lot of the policies around that deal with the security space, that deal with police response in the countries that we are in, are policies that are created and formed in government and are supported by international governments. And I think that we cannot ignore the fact that the donor agencies, the US government, having a word or having their input or engaging further to ensure that these policies are equitable, to ensure that police brutality is not occurring even as justice is administered, as order is ensured in our different countries, will make a change. I think it's important for me to say that more needs to be done in terms of holding our governments accountable, because whoever holds the resources holds the power. I think more can be done in terms of ensuring grassroots organizations have access to resources and support. Resources are not just financial resources, but also capacity. Many of the grassroots organizations and community-based organizations are run by young people that probably have limited capacity, but have a lot of passion and are deeply rooted in the needs of their communities. But it is so difficult to get access to opportunities, particularly access to finances to run our programs, because of the limitations that have been set and because of the expectations that are required. And sometimes this is a capacity gap. So I feel like it would be useful if the donor community, as well, the US government, rethought their approach to how they engage with grassroots organizations, how they partner, and how they support smaller organizations, particularly those run by young people, so that communities can feel more impact. I think there can be an upscaling of programs that are working. So, for example, I am honored as a young person to be on the board of International Youth Foundation, and they're doing amazing work in the US, and they're also doing an amazing program that can be scaled up virtually, which is called PTS Traveler. And if such programs can be scaled up or replicated in partnership with organizations in different countries on the ground, then I think it would make a huge difference. One of our offshoot organizations that we are running here is currently being funded by the US Embassy in Kenya, and we are training young women on peace and governance. And we have amazing young women that are doing such good work in their communities because of the support that we are getting. And so if this can be scaled up, and if this can be made easier for us to be able to access, I believe we will be able to create a safer, more equitable world that is being pushed by collective ownership by all people at all levels within our communities.
Thank you so much, Nafula, for those comments about the collective ownership and partnership. And also, it's very encouraging to hear about US funding for programs that are actually being effective and valuable. What is your top recommendation for the new administration on what they should do? In one sentence, on if you personally have benefited from any US funding and policy in your work.
Thank you so much. My first recommendation would be to create youth-specific funding mechanisms by international donors, funding mechanisms that take advantage of the nature of youth organizations and that place emphasis on their capacity to make change rather than other forms of expertise that they may not have. Second is forge strong partnerships within international peace building or international humanitarian development and peace building actors and local partners, local youth organizations. Now, these local organizations know the context better. They are aware of the customs and traditions, and they're in the best place to actually implement these programs on the ground. So I want that more partnership between INGOs and youth organizations. Thank you.
Fantastic. So my colleagues have mentioned all the key points. You know, for me, it's really just to add something that I think they might not have mentioned, and that is the potential for you know, programs around social cohesion and nation building. I mean, everyone is talking about the racial injustice and gender injustices is happening in the United States, but it's happening across Africa as well. We are a divided continent. And we need to empower the youth to become agents of change. How are they going to be empowered and capacitated to drive the active role of entrenching social cohesion and nation building within their countries, as well as how are we strengthening youth movements? Because we do have a few, we have pockets, but we need an army. We need an army of youth movements across Africa that's going to drive this particular agenda, because you cannot build on something that is divided and broken. Then secondly, I would like to say I benefit of 3 programs, actually the Obama Foundation program, Obama Leaders Africa program. I was a Mandela Washington Fellow. I'm still a campaigner for the One Global campaign. So in terms of them amplifying my work and then providing me the skills to become a better leader, my ability to network across the continent, because now I'm connected with every single youth leader across the continent and we can collaborate on efforts. But the funding is the challenge. And Wula mentioned that it's so disheartening because we have the capacity, we're leaders, we have the ideas, you know, but we're just not getting to the money. And that is why a lot of young people give up, because they just cannot continue on running on low capacity in the way that they are. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nafula, Orwell, and Melina.